Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Fernari. I'm the editor of Brewbound, and welcome to Brew Talks. Big round of applause for Great Divide for hosting us. Thank you, everyone, for showing up. And yeah, we got a couple great panels and discussions set up for you guys today. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Brew Talks, it's our traveling meetup series. We do a couple of business discussions, and it's really meant to just engage with one another and have some thought-provoking conversation about the future of the business and the future of beer. And that's why we've got these folks up here today. I want to start by just kind of laying sort of the lay of the land right now. And I know a lot of you guys already know this, but I think we're at a pretty interesting inflection point right now in the industry where there are more than 5,700 craft breweries now, and about 2,000 of those are brew pubs, and approximately 3,500 of them are microbreweries, and then you have roughly 200 or so regional breweries. And they're all essentially competing for a shrinking pie. I think there's only, in 1995, beer had about 60% of total beverage alcohol market share. And now it's down to 50%. So you've got a lot more breweries that are competing for a smaller piece of the total alcoholic beverage segment. In 1995, there were only about 1,000 breweries. Wine and spirits have made some tremendous gains in the category, in the beverage alcohol category. And craft brewers have done an amazing job of growing and scaling and connecting with consumers. But it's getting much more difficult. And that's sort of the 30,000-foot view. But, as you all know, larger beer manufacturers have lost millions of barrels. Craft breweries now account for about 12% of all the beer sold in the U.S., but the days of double-digit growth have kind of come and gone. 39 of the top 100 craft brands were in decline, and craft sales are only up about 2% over the last 12 months, according to Nielsen. So in other words, growth is harder to come by. And for this discussion, we wanted to focus on some of the small to mid-sized brands. We wanted to focus on the breweries that I personally think are perhaps the most vulnerable. A lot of them took on a considerable amount of bank debt to grow at a time when growth was, chugging along at 10, 12, 15%. And now that it's slowed, you have banks that are calling notes. You have breweries that are finding it more difficult to find new growth opportunities. You have distributors that are, from what I hear, looking to shed brands, asking brewers to scale back their portfolios, not deliver as many SKUs to them. So it's just gotten more challenging. And that's why these guys are here today, because they have all the answers. And they're going to share them with you. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce all the way down there, Dave Fields. He's the managing partner of Wormtown Brewery. He also was, in a former life, a distributor, so he brings an interesting perspective. John Bryant, who's been in the industry for a very, very long time at a number of reputable brands. I might get a couple of these wrong, I hope not, but Odell and Oscar Blues and Deschutes, and now the owner of No-Li Brewhouse in Spokane. And of course, Bryan Slekes from Great Divide, Senior Director of Finance, and you're also managing all the sales outside of Colorado, correct? So big round of applause for these guys. Thank you. So real quick, I'll start with Dave. You're a fast-growing brewery in the New England area, but some folks might not know what you're all about. So maybe real briefly for all you guys, just give us sort of the high-level view, the elevator pitch of what you guys are about, where you guys are headed in 2017.
Sure. So Wormtown Brewery is in Worcester, Mass. Take far too long for me to tell you guys where the name comes from, but grab me for a beer afterwards and I'll be happy to explain it to you. But net, it's a nickname for the city. Founded in 2010. I was the distributor for the brand at the time. Really fell in love with the brand, saw a great opportunity, worked really hard with the original founders of the brewery, and eventually decided that being on this side of the ledger was a whole lot more exciting than being on the distributor side. So I joined them as a managing partner about 5 years ago. At the time, we were working out of a 900 square foot space, doing about 2,700 barrels of beer a year, really maximizing that square footage. As we sit here today, we just finished a 10,000 square foot expansion. We're occupying about 26,000 square feet of space. We'll finish 17 at 27,000 barrels of actual production and sales. And we had 10,000 barrels of capacity land yesterday while I was here. So it was really cool. I did not have to move those tanks in yesterday for the first time, but I had a lot of great pictures. Wormtown itself, we're all about local. The story we tell everybody is we could have been Worcester Brewing Company, but that was really boring. Wormtown Brewery solidified us in the marketplace. We brand all of our brands with some type of quiet connection to the local marketplace. And one of our slogans is a piece of mass in every glass. So we always brew with locally grown ingredients, and we try to have a little bit of fun with it along the way.
And you only sell your beer in Massachusetts and a small pocket of Rhode Island and soon New Hampshire, correct?
Correct. So we are distributed just in Massachusetts. Took us 6 years to actually fill out the Massachusetts footprint. And then once we filled out the Massachusetts footprint and felt comfortable in the ability to supply our distributor, growth model, then we made the foray into Rhode Island for the first time in April of this year. But we did it with one brand, draft only, and we did a real rifle selected approach with what type of accounts and where we wanted to be. We'll introduce package to them in November. So after about 6 months of just getting a feel for the market to understand how well our brand traveled, we are going to take a stab at New Hampshire probably January, first quarter of 2018.
And John, you have a pretty similar setup at No-Li, but a little different path in terms of distribution. Maybe tell the story briefly of No-Li and how you got synced up with the company.
Yeah, No-Li Brewhouse was formed in about May of 2012. In the former site, we actually have a 30-barrel brewhouse. It was the Bayou Brewing Company that went into Spokane, Washington about 94, 95, way ahead of its time. Had some financial issues and basically kind of went out of business in the early 2000s. A brewery went in there called Northern Lights Brewing Company. And again, I think it was just a little ahead of its time in the Spokane. The craft beer market was lagging a little bit behind some of the other West Coast markets. I partnered with Mark Irvin, who was the brewer and owner in 12. And we took, to kind of honor what we have is a real deep history of brewing in this site, to honor kind of the culture and the history of what Northern Lights and the Bayou Brewing Company were, we shortened it to No-Li. And in that process, we changed yeast, we changed ingredients. It wasn't simply a rebrand, it was kind of a reculture. And part of who we are deeply is you got to give more than you take. And I think that's a little change in this three-tier industry. Because I think a decade ago, you could take a lot and give a little bit because the wave was so, it was going this way, and it hadn't crested yet. But I think everybody in this room is quickly figuring out you got to find your niche, you got to be an expert, you got to find a way to be profitable at it, but you got to find what your purpose is that gets you out of bed every day, because it may not be money. So if you're a home brewer going pro and you're running on that passion is going to run dry eventually. So get that business model, get a strong balance sheet. And that's what we've been working to do, is really get a strong balance sheet. And we say give more than we take, innovation. Give more innovation than maybe we're borrowing. Give more back to the community service. However you choose to interact in your community, be deeply a part of it. It's got to be meaningful. It's not posing. It's real. You give till it hurts. And that becomes part of your culture. So flash forward today, we're about a 14,000 barrel brewery. We sell 90+% of that in the state of Washington. And that's kind of our thing, a state of Washington, Pacific Northwest craft brewery.
It wasn't always that way, though.
No, I mean, when it was the Bayou Brewing Company, it was probably 800 barrels. When it was the Northern Lights Brewing Company, it was 700 to 900 barrels. And what we decided to do was we want to be a craft beer epicenter for the state of Washington. And to be relevant and from Spokane, Washington, which is on the far east side, the climate's much more like Colorado. 300 miles away to the west in the peninsula is Seattle. Much more, it's rainforest, the Olympics, beautiful area, more cosmopolitan. But to travel and be relevant 300 miles away, you got to be special.
Yeah. Well, we'll touch more on that in a minute. Bryan, obviously, you guys are sort of the elder statesman, I suppose, on the panel. Great Divide is. Maybe talk about kind of where Great Divide is at this year, coming off a somewhat tough year last year, and what you guys are doing to kind of course correct, I guess, and look towards the future.
Sure. So Great Divide has been around for just over 23 years, and last year was a bit of a tough year for us. We had to do away with a couple brands that just weren't doing too well, but we have listened to our consumers and really started to innovate and look at beers that are a little bit more approachable. We've always been known for our big, bold beers and our commitment to quality, which will continue throughout the history of this brewery. In my biased opinion, you look at this facility, it's state-of-the-art. We really did it the right way. It was a major investment, but it was what we felt we needed to do. So this year we hope to end roughly around 40,000 barrels. And the majority of our business stays here in Colorado. We're about 60% of our business is here in Colorado, and we distribute out to roughly 25 states out of the state. So
you guys are all in roundabout sort of the same general area in terms of barrelage. 15 to 40,000 barrels. And as I said earlier, I mean, that is really sort of a vulnerable position to be in today's marketplace. You have, 3,500 other breweries beneath you that are, more local or, smaller and more niche or more independent or some other persuasion of whatever they're more than you are. And then from the top, you have larger corporately held brands, larger independent established craft breweries, and they're feeling it as well. They're feeling the pressure as well. I mean, you look at a Boston Beer, a Sierra Nevada, all these companies are sort of feeling the slowdown, and they're trying to figure it out as well. And then there's a group of brands where you guys live right in the middle, kind of getting squeezed. So that's what I wanted to focus on. What do you guys see as the biggest challenges and the biggest headwinds facing companies like yours? And we'll start there, and I'll start with Dave.
Oh boy, so it's a very interesting position to be in. I think really for everybody, because it's a dynamic time in our industry. Things that can be done today couldn't be done 5 years ago, whether it's legislatively or taproom breweries or whatever that may be. But we are a distribution brewery. 98% of what we brew does go out to the marketplace. So we compete day to day for tap handles or shelf space. So I think for us, and it was our DNA and it's how we started, making sure your foundation was secure. So we always talk about a mile deep and an inch wide. And I think it's one of the reasons why we were so slow to develop our geography. And it wasn't that we were afraid our brand wouldn't travel, but we felt as though when those competitive storms came, that we would be really secure. We would know that we were really tight with that retailer, or that we had really developed the right position in the distributor's portfolio, that we would always be relevant and we would always be top of mind. And I think you have to know who you are, and you have to ensure that in the marketplace, consumers, retailers, distributors understand who you are and where you belong. And then once you've settled that foundation, you can start the expansion process. And once you have that, you have a good base. And if those storms inevitably come, I think you're in a better position to weather those storms.
Yeah, and you touched on the wholesaler element of it. John, what are some strategies that No-Li has employed to stay relevant with your wholesalers and to, get their attention and be a focus? Because right now, I mean, there's, I think, a real sort of push to simplify what they're doing because of all the, brands that have come into their houses, and they're really not set up to, manage all of this creative innovation that's gone on, and the consumer is, really looking at trial and, rotation nation, and they want new, and that's kind of a headache for wholesalers. So, how do you kind of rise to the top of the list when they've taken on so many brands and they're dealing with it as well?
Yeah, the first thing would a few points. One is balance sheet on your financials. make sure you can get as strong as you can. The weaker your financials are, the more desperate decisions you make. You'll do things that you compromise in relationships, in contracts, just in things you have to do to survive, and we've all been there. So the first thing is if you can get your balance sheet as strong as possible that allows you to make the intelligent decisions you know to make, but you're just not able to. I would say secondly is own to the best of your ability. When I say own, be a part of your home market. More than just shipping beer and taking a lot from it, participate in it. You're gonna have to give till it hurts. And I say that it's when you give into your community financially or time-wise, that it's simply not for a press clipping, but it's because who you are, that creates your culture. That'd be the second thing. With distributors, and there may be some in this room, this is about dollars and cents today. We have, I would like to think, good relationships with other distributors. We sit down and we can have coffee and smile, or we can yell at each other and throw pots and pans. But at the end of the day, we have to have a common place of where we're going. And to do that, I would say try to keep pricing integrity. Distributors are gonna watch not just margin per item, but dollars per item, because you bank dollars, you don't bank percentages. You wanna have a good growth rate, so make sure that you have brands that can fetch a good price, brand equity, and get enough volume to create enough revenue, because you're gonna be ranked in those portfolios by dollars. If you like it or not, you're gonna be ranked on a sheet. It's like the Mendoza line in baseball. You fall below a certain line, you're gone. And in this room, we can all look left to right, and we all won't be here probably in 3 years. It's kind of that way. But if you have something that's so needed by the customer, you create the need, which is also your distributor and your retailer, you got to find what that is. You just have to find what that is. So if that's a beer style, a brand type, your branding, your community work, something that creates volume, margin, and dollars. Because when you sit in that room with that distributor, that's what they're thinking. Because when they do their yearly plans as a distributor, you're one line item on probably 150. And you'll be ranked on the dollars you bring in and the percent black or red as you're trending. And it's almost sometimes that cut and dry. And I hate to take the romance out of what we're doing, but we've gone, to your point, from a couple thousand barrel breweries to coming up on 6,000, and it's getting really crowded out there.
Yeah. In thinking about the scale element of that, I mean, there's so much to pick through here, but obviously you get to a point where, if you're relevant enough in your wholesaler's book to have all this demand in the marketplace, you have to have consistent product flowing through. And Dave, you told a great story the other day about, why it was such a challenge for one of your wholesalers to run, out of stock on your beer and what that meant to them. And I think that there are, a lot of beer companies that are similarly sized that have, maybe not invested in that capacity yet and are thinking about an expansion or, potentially just about to embark on one. Can you talk about the balance that you guys need to strike between, having enough capacity to fill demand, not oversupplying on the capacity side for demand that might not be there, and satisfying the wholesaler needs so that you don't run out of stock and so that, you don't become sort of the black sheep in their book?
Sure. So I'd start with following up on your conversation about a strong balance sheet. For any brewers in the room who are just getting started or thinking of getting started, if you're at the position where you can sell 100% of your beer in your tap room, do it. Don't worry about distribution just yet, because you'll get a really strong balance sheet really quickly if you don't have to worry about managing a distributor relationship, because it is a business within a business. The specific experience that Chris was talking about, when I first joined Wormtown, Ben and Tom, who are my partners, sat me down and said, hey, listen, you're the distributor expert. This is what we expect you to do. And can you fix these relationships, because they're all screwed up and these guys they're not doing the job for us, and we need to hold them accountable for it. And so I started diving into that, but obviously I did it with a distributor's mind as to how we were operating as a brewery. And eventually that led to our Boston distributor, Burke Distributors, our number one distributor today, who at the time was our number one in terms of volume, but at the time was our number 3 distributor, both in terms of tenure and size. And we were struggling with them. And I went and met with the VP of sales, and we just kind of had a talk, and I said, tell me about us. Tell me about us as a partner. Where do we fall short? How are we holding you back? How can we be better as a partner? And it was real simple. He looked at me and said, David, you have to get us more beer. I said, well, that's easier said than done. We're operating out of a 900 square foot, ice cream shop. And I said, well, tell me why that's so hard. I mean, we get you great beer. You're getting lines left and right. They're holding, they're maintaining. And he said, yeah, that's great. But you get me 50 cases of beer a week, 50 cases of beer a month to sell any off-premise. That's 80% of my business. It's a 9 million case market. He said, and I get 1 case a month to bring to my largest customer who buys 500 cases of Coors Light. He buys 400 cases of Miller Lite. He buys 400 cases of Sam Adams. And every time one of my sales reps or managers walks in, he sits there and says, if you don't get me 5 more cases of Wormtown Be Hoppy a month, you're going to lose that end cap. You're going to lose that door. I'm going to take you out of an ad until you start bringing this beer to me. And plainly spoken, forgive me, I'm from Massachusetts, so I am a masshole. He looked at me and said, you are ruining relationships with some of our biggest customers because you cannot get us the beer we need. And so that was an aha moment for me. I brought it back to my partners and I said, guys, here's what's going on. We can't ask for any more out of them than what they're doing. And in fact, we should probably go to them and talk about scaling back, maybe withdrawing from the marketplace, because we're just not ready to meet the needs of, a 6, 7, 8 million case distributor in a metropolitan marketplace like Boston. When we got together and talked about that distributor to brewer, they said that wasn't what they wanted to see happen, but they needed more consistency. They needed to see a plan. They needed to know what we were making for investments in order to start growing the business in a meaningful way to help them compete at retail. And that was a challenge, and it was expensive to figure out how to make that happen, but we ultimately did.
Yeah. Bryan, what's been your experience in that area? I mean, have you had a similar experience out of state, or are you kind of the opposite where you are having to go into the wholesalers and ask for more attention, and you have product that you wanted to deliver to them, and you just need to convince them to get behind it and help build the brand outside of Colorado?
Yeah, sure. It really depends on the market, but there certainly are markets out of state that we are really trying to demand and command more attention from our wholesalers. For us, it really boils down to a lot of internal forecasting and number crunching when it comes to what is that fine balance between supply and demand and trying to predict the future, which I'm an underwriter by trade, and I will tell you it is a lot of guesswork. And so it's really tough to understand, especially when new brands come out and new styles come out. It's really tough to understand how much to produce and what the demand is really going to be. So for us, we just go through as much analysis as we possibly can. I probably overanalyze it to death. Our sales folks help out a lot by talking to their wholesalers, but even then, there are times when our wholesalers might not be behind a particular style, and it goes crazy, and we are out of stock on it, and that's tough out there. I mean, you really hurt relationships when that happens.
So how do you guys stay nimble so that you're able to kind of react to something like that if a brand does take off? How do you guys stay nimble enough to be able to pivot and shift kind of on a dime?
Well, for us, we focus on our top markets, where we have the most share of mind and are top of mind with our wholesalers. So we'll focus on those and do whatever we can to get them the beer. But also talking about the future and what could we do better, and really having that conversation with the wholesaler. They're a partner of ours, so we have to sit down and game plan and strategize together and be partners, not just during the process, but before and after it.
Sure. So we've talked a little bit about some of the challenges that breweries are facing and some of the headwinds, and I guess really focusing on sort of that relationship between supplier and wholesaler. What are some of the characteristics of breweries that you guys, as you guys look out into the space, what are some of the characteristics of breweries that you think are the most vulnerable today? What are some of these organizations doing or not doing that's putting them at risk? And I'm thinking, again, similarly sized breweries that are kind of in that in-between middle ground between the larger established players and the taproom focused, 3,500 other long tail.
So I'll reach back to an experience I had with Alan Newman once when he was at Magic Hat, and I was selling the brand to our distributor, and he used a phrase called "getting out of your ski tips." Especially we're in Colorado, an appropriate analogy, but just going too fast and too far before you're ready for that. So I think, in my experience and the way we are working at Wormtown, I look at breweries that I've partnered with on the distribution side, and I cherry pick things I've seen they've done wrong. And I'll use a good example of a brewery that came to us as a local guy when I was a distributor, and we didn't have a local option. And this was before local became as big as it is today. We're dialing back the clock probably 15 years ago. And our team and our market was so excited to have a local player there. And all he was doing was focusing all his time and energy on opening Rhode Island, opening DC, opening Maine. And he didn't really truly have a good feel for where his sweet spot was, what his brand could be and should be in the marketplace. So I think guys that are vulnerable are some people who may be spread too wide, maybe going too fast at an uncontrollable pace. We set a goal for ourselves 4 years ago and realized we could grow our brewery about 5,000 barrels a year. Regardless of what the marketplace asked for us, we knew 5,000 barrels to 7,000 barrels was really comfortable for us, and we knew how to do that because quality control matters. The ability to stay true to oneself matters. And so if you don't understand who you are, you don't have a really good feel for operationally what you can do, I look at those breweries and sometimes say, why are they in Florida when their next closest geography is Connecticut? Where's the plan? What's the fallback there? So I think having a good true sense of self and sticking to who you are is very, very, very important.
But it's possible that some of those decisions are being made because of, financial decisions or, expansion decisions that were made prior to that, right?
No doubt about it. But if you're in that position where you're chasing, sometimes we've all seen examples of breweries that do get stretched out, and when they pull back, they start performing better in certain times. And if not, both on a sales standpoint, but financially, they certainly can.
You have a little bit of experience with pulling back, right, John, from some markets?
Yeah, I guess I would like to, Jack Joyce, who founded one of the early guys of Nike and founded Rogue, was a huge mentor. The guy was brilliant. And on a lot of fronts, financial, branding, beer, people, culture. What he taught me was embrace that everybody here is different and don't shy away from that. You're different for a reason. You're risk takers. You believe in something greater than a dollar bill. And that's what will set you apart from the larger brewers. You're going to have to do yearly plans with distributors, but don't get tripped up over those. And I drive our staff crazy because once a week I might go, I get the quarterly plan, but here's the week's plan because here's the inflection point in the marketplace, and we're going to seize it because we're special, we're different, and we respond to the emotion and the movement of society. That's what beer is. We're part of society. Society is not mapped out in a year. Nobody knows what everything's going to happen tomorrow. You have to be flexible to that. Like Jack used to say, they're the Redcoats, we're the Minutemen. And when you lose that, you lose, why are we sitting here? It's when you get comfortable and you become risk adverse that you will lose. I know in our 5.5-year period when I purchased out my partner, we had a crossroads. We saw the headwinds. We both saw what was coming down. And we're like, who wants to go spend time with family? Who wants to regroup? Who wants to get on the trail and keep going? And after a lot of discussion, like, you know what? I'm going to take that trail. Not soon after that, we had the biggest storm in Spokane that shut our brewery down for about 2.5 weeks. No revenue in our pub, no beer being shipped. I got a big debt to pay, and you're up at 2 a.m. Not just one night, but a whole lots of nights. And you really find who you are. You're either going to fight like a son of a bitch and figure it out, or you're going to give up. And this room is full of people who don't give up. Don't give up that strength. That's what makes you different. And I think the larger breweries, be it the larger regionals or the larger national, don't have what you have. You're not guaranteed a salary. There's no profit sharing probably in this room. I don't have it. What we have is cash flow, hopefully, or money to go buy a tank on a loan, banking on that I can fill that fermenter and turn it, based on that I can get the price for it, based on the brand's correct, based on the market will receive it. But that's what we're betting on, so don't give up your ability to risk. And I know it's easy to say because, we've been maybe counted out 2 or 3 times in the last 5.5 years. It has not been easy. But I sit here today going, I think we've made it through a lot of tough patches, and it makes us all in this room different. It makes you different from the regional and the national brands. Your DNA code is different because you're sitting here. And that is your blessed strength. Use it, and do not let a distributor take it away from you.
Yeah. A lot of breweries, I get the sense that there are probably a lot of breweries that don't have that cash flow, though, that are burning through money, that are in serious debt, and that is causing them to make decisions that they might not otherwise have made. Bryan, as the Senior Director of Finance at Great Divide, can you speak to some of the financial decision-making that needs to go on behind the scenes to ensure that a brewery is, as Dave said, not getting out over its ski tips, it can service its debt, and it can remain profitable as it, looks for growth opportunities and looks for expansion opportunities?
Sure. I think it's, like these guys have said, it's just so easy to do when you do have debt, and obviously we do with this facility. It's so easy to start chasing volume and just make rash decisions. What's key is you have to be able to take a step back, come up with a strategy, and explain that strategy to your lenders, your distributors, your staff, and be able to all believe in it, to be able to make that come to fruition. And if that means I write a couple more bank memos every once in a while, then so be it, which I'm doing. I wonder if our banker's here. He can attest. But yeah, it's really important to take a step back and think a little bit more long term and not be so short-sighted, because it'll never work out. And we've seen it in some markets where it just doesn't, and so we can point to those real-life examples with our staff, our bankers, and our shareholders. So we are trying to do that much more often these days to really focus on the future and look at other opportunities, such as this space right here is an event space for us, and the weddings and receptions and corporate events we have here, we got to get creative sometimes, and we've done that. Our retail outlet is doing really well, and we're focused there as well. And then, like I said earlier, innovation and just being able to steer this ship, which is a very, very big ship. It's not a little tuna boat. It's a big, big ship. So it takes time to do that, and we have to be able to explain that again to our lenders and our shareholders. But as long as you can write good memos, I think you're all set.
So hire a copy editor. John, Bryan mentioned, kind of resisting the urge to chase volume. And, when we were prepping for this panel, you had made a comment about the sort of emergence of 15 packs in the craft space. And, you've been around the business a long time and you've seen trends come and go. Can you maybe enlighten us and speak to some of the experience that you have with that package format and explain why you're not so bullish on the 15 pack's ability to sort of punch through the ceiling, as it were, and be this life-saving format for craft beer?
Yeah, I can tell you about failure. So I was at G. Heilman Brewing Company in the late 80s, early 90s, when that was a consortium of breweries, which was Rainier Brewery, Henry Weinhard's on the West Coast, Old Style, a $3+ million brand in the Midwest, Jacob Schmidt Beer. You had Pearl Brewery, Lone Star, Mickey's Malt Liquor, a bunch of stuff that was rolled together. They sold it to the Australians for way overpriced. Well, once they figured out they paid nearly 3 times what it was worth and they couldn't make their payment, all hell broke loose. Okay, now we got to drive volume. We got to drive volume now. I mean, we got to make loads look good. We got to make, revenues look good, maybe not net profits. So I think, part of one of the very first 15 packs in America, I think. It was the Old Style 15 and 18 pack and the Rainier Brewery one. And all that was 12 beers for the price of 15. And all it did was cannibalize our higher end brands that made us money. And I remember getting my ass handed to me by a finance guy and I think think a marketing guy was getting a lashing too, because we did a TV commercial in Seattle to promote the new 15-pack. This is like 1990 or something. He goes, why the hell would you go spend all of this money on a TV commercial to promote a brand that makes us no money? Like, why would you do that? And I'm like, well, why the hell are you having me do something that drives volume? I mean, it's this thing, right? 15 packs to me is like when a brewery goes from 6 packs to 12 packs. There's a reason. You need volume. When you go from a 12 pack to a 15 pack, that's value added. Unless the price goes up 3 cans, you're flushing your brand equity. Because now try to sell the 12 pack next to it for the same price. I mean, we all get that logically, but that's where a balance sheet screws you. Because sometimes when you're doing a 15 pack, you probably owe somebody a lot of money. And you got to get the volume up to get your efficiencies in your plan. I'm not saying that's universal and that's how it always is. That was my experience. And that was the end of the Rainier Brewery and the old style brewery of any type of independence they ever had. Then they were sold off a number of times, and I think it's made in California by Miller Coors or Pabst that doesn't own a brewery. Yeah. It did nothing to trade up your brand. It did nothing to draw new customers on price. What it did was become a party pack for a low price.
So then how does craft mainstream beyond what it already has? Because, I mean, that's the world that craft brewers need to play in if they want to grow market share and if, you know, we want craft beer as a beverage to be more widely consumed. They're going to have to offer these types of accessible package formats in terms of price and in terms of volume to the consumer. So I don't know, panel's thoughts on, you know, how craft mainstreams, and really the real question is what breweries are equipped or set up to accomplish it. You know, not every brewery is able to do that, and there are probably some breweries, and I've seen a couple of them, that maybe are reaching a bit with some of those package formats, and maybe they're not ready for it yet. They're still pretty regional, still pretty small. But you know, how do you mainstream if that's not the answer? You know, how does craft get to 20% market share if it's not through 15 packs?
I don't think any of us get paid enough to answer that magical question. If we did, we wouldn't be worried about our balance sheets. You know, Chris, I don't know that I agree, because I don't know that any of us, to his comments about the entrepreneurship in the room, I don't know that we have to be mainstream to get there. You know, I think we can make great beer and continue to introduce consumers to better awareness about styles, about ingredients, about processes, and I think we have a shot at getting to 20 without doing that. But every brewery is a little bit different. Every brewery is in a little different scenario. I can, just speaking for Wormtown, as we're rolling into New Hampshire, I talked a little bit about that earlier. New Hampshire is going to be our first very chain-heavy state. 80% or 85% of that state is off-premise. 15 to 20% is on-premise. It's actually, I think it's more like 90-10. And 80 or 90% of that goes through chain markets. So as we've talked to our wholesalers that we're going to work with in New Hampshire, we kind of laid out the plan for them very simply. We don't really want to be there because we don't want to move into 12 packs. We don't have to put a chain team in place. We don't want to sit in front of national decision makers and play the game by their rules. And their answer simply was, we can be successful without that. Just understand you have to temper your volume expectations for New Hampshire. And we said, that's fine. So we built a business plan, not expecting to be mainstream in New Hampshire, but one that's profitable for us. And we'll work that plan. Hopefully we won't get ourselves in a position where it's desperate. And we're going to try to avoid doing things just like that in order to be true to ourselves.
Yeah. John, you seem to think, though, that chains are going to play an increasingly important role in the development of craft moving forward.
Yeah, to Brian and David's point, maybe if you're not in a position, because we're all in different places financially and capacity, if you don't have to measure your success by volume, measure it by revenue per barrel. The strongest thing you can do, I mean, you can sell 2 barrels of beer for half the price, right? Or just sell 1. So these guys are right. Work your tap house, build your core, build your DNA, build your community through your tap house. We can all do the numbers what a barrel of beer over the bar is. It's significantly more than selling it even through self-distribution or through a distributor. So to the point, ramp that sucker up the best you can, sell every drop you can through there. Bump Williams, you probably heard his name. He's kind of the beer whisperer, does a lot of things nationally, speaks a lot. If you can get Bump's time, I would take it. And Bump would tell you, because he came and presented at the brewery, is work your tap house. It's the most profitable thing you can do. Work your tap house. Measure revenue per barrel. Volume's important, but dollars per barrel is the most important thing you can do. Then scale up as you select with your cost of goods and your revenue per barrel and your profit per barrel, how much you need to be at that price point you desire. Otherwise, you're going to start chasing commodity-sized chains to fill that volume in, and then that's going to chase you down lower pricing in the other chains. To your point, Chris, yes, the on-premise, as we know, feels kind of saturated. And the bigger brewers, let's face it, the ones buying the other brewers, they're boxing you out of stadiums now. They're boxing you out of music venues. They're boxing you out of the big commercial places because they have the checkbook. They have the sponsorships. You know, an example would be Seattle at Safeco Field. It looks like Hop Valley Field. That's a beer out of Oregon. So the city of Seattle is pouring Oregon beer, which is great beer. But wouldn't you think it would be more Seattle breweries? It's part of the Miller Coors sponsorship. I get it, right? But we don't have a chance of hell of being poured in Safeco Field where the Seattle Mariners play. And my wife and I were lucky enough to be on a bank commercial during every Mariners game because we borrowed so much damn money from the bank, right? But we couldn't, you could see the bank commercial during the Mariners game. The bank was the sponsor of the Mariners, but you couldn't get our beer at the Mariners ballpark. We couldn't close the loop. So then don't fish there unless your distributor can help you in. The on-premise does feel saturated. It costs more and more to sell a keg of beer. Be it rotation, whatever you want to call it. You got point of sale, you got bar tabs, you got all the things that go to get that handle, creating the handle. For God's sake, we make them by hand still, and they're gone. Is it really worth that time? A certain amount of exposure you do need. There's no doubt about it. Chain stores, the off-sale. You see what's happening in Colorado now. It's starting to open up. But across the Northwest, if you're not in the grocery stores in cans or bottles or some type of package, it will be hard for your development to that big next step. But you may not want that big next step because a lot comes with it. Equipment, people, hiring expertise, just a lot of stuff. So it's not as simple as making bottles, making cans, send them to your distributor and go, see you later, I'll take the check in 2 to 3 weeks. Because what happens is in a month and a half when they call you and say, come pick it up, it's out of code, that's a bad place to be.
Yeah. Do you guys worry at all about what your individual brewery's futures are at the size that you're at today, and just looking out at the marketplace and looking at some of these top line figures of the craft segment slowing down in terms of overall growth, and just where you guys sit today? And I'll pose this to Bryan first. I mean, long term, do you have fears or concerns about your ability to sort of take that next step and get into that next level, and what might happen if you can't? I mean, what's sort of keeping you guys up at night?
Yes, a lot of fear, actually. But I actually think that that's healthy and that's warranted and needed to actually sit down, take a step back, and write your business plan for your future. Go through all those opportunities. Go through some of our weaknesses, some of our strengths, some of those threats that keep us up at night. Take a look at all of those, sit down as a team and a partnership with your distributors and really sit down and write that business plan for your future. So I like that fear a little bit because I think it helps us write a better story for our future.
What are Great Divide's strengths and weaknesses?
I think we do a great job of some of our strengths here in Colorado and really connecting with the community. There's a ton of people moving into this state every year, and us being able to scream that we're Denver's brewery, whether it's through Denver Pale Ale, and sometimes that's just fortunate luck, right? I mean, you get that brand or that name that you can call your own. But I think we do a great job of telling our story here in Denver. And now how do we, and now an opportunity or a weakness maybe is to focus on how we tell that story to folks across the country, because it's a lot harder to do. So again, take a step back, write that business plan for your future, what markets do you really want to focus on, and how do you plan on supporting them, whether it's people, resources, money, whatever have you. But those are things that all need to be on the table when you're talking about that.
I'll pose that same question to John and Dave, but slightly different. What are your biggest weaknesses, and how are you addressing them today?
Starting with me.
Sure.
So on our end, I think if I were to answer that with the question of what keeps me up at night, I think it's actually truly the same answer. So our greatest strength, our people. I really truly believe that. But I think our greatest worry is also our people. When Ben and Tom, especially when they started this thing, and when I got involved, we were looking for maybe in 10 or 15 years growing a brewery to 15,000 barrels and having 8 or 10 people that worked in the brewery that were truly family. They had ownership in the brand and the brewery, and we could take care of them as if they were partners in what was going on. And as the brewery has grown, we sit here today and we're 28, 29 full-time employees, 10 part-time. By the end of next year, we'll be 32. And I think that while we still have an unbelievable team of people, what I worry about is we're at the size and the scale now, and I hadn't thought of this when we talked the other day, but other investors are looking at our brand and saying, wow, they've got a great head brewer, I could offer him equity. Or other breweries are looking at Wormtown and saying, they have an assistant packaging manager, we need a packaging manager, there's a guy who's got skill. So all of a sudden you're starting to worry about how do you maintain employees, how do you replace employees, how do you hire good new employees when other breweries are going pretty deep into that talent pool. And then on top of all that, how do you maintain your culture? How do you keep that value system in place that you wanted for 5 or 6 or 7 employees so that 35 people still feel that same sense of ownership and pride in what they do? And that's probably my biggest worry is how to keep our people still engaged and in love. And what we like to say is we call it bleeding the black and yellow, of Wormtown.
All right. Well, I was going to say you were bordering on like the Michael Scott answer there, Your greatest strengths are your weaknesses. John, how about for you? Biggest weaknesses for No-Li and what you guys are doing to address them as you look out into the future and you think about the next 12 to 18 months and where you guys are headed?
On the similar lines, we can be aware of the competitive forces, but we have to be problem solvers and we have to own it, period. So the biggest thing, I do believe that No-Li is a cause. And if I don't believe it's a cause, then I shouldn't get out of bed because it's too much damn work. I mean, you have to believe that it's a cause, that because you exist in this room, that the world's a better place, or craft beer's a better place, or your community's a better place, or the people you work beside every day for countless hours make it a better place. I mean, otherwise, a lot of us here are idealists because that's why we love beer so much. That's why home brewers turn pro. They just believe so deeply that they're going to make a difference that your beer's in the room. My biggest worry, do our people believe at No-Li, there's 63 of us with our pub, that because they are at the brewery every day or they're serving a customer every day, they're making a difference? Because when you believe you're making a difference in a good way, you serve somebody differently. And call it millennials or snowflakes or whatever the hell you want to call them, okay? We can laugh about it, right? Do they believe that they contribute in a way beyond themselves and their little orbit? The biggest risk to us is, do they believe that they are actually participating in something bigger than themselves? And when we crack through that one by one, and I push people, believe me, you can ask them. I'm trying to find what people are made of. I want to know if they want to be a part of the No-Li cause or they just want to be in craft beer, because there's a difference. I'm not looking to have anybody drink Kool-Aid or join a cult. I just want to know that you give a shit. I want to know why you're in craft beer, because when the going gets tough and we're sleeping in some ass crap hotel for $49 a night by an airport, right? You gotta laugh, get a half case of beer, and smile, and that's when good times and culture's made. That's the biggest piece. And as we grow, we have to keep attracting and holding on to people like that.
Interesting. We've talked a lot about challenges. We've talked a lot about some tougher topics and the things that not just mid-sized craft breweries, but all craft breweries need to think about. I want to kind of turn the conversation to think about some of the opportunities and think about some of the positive things that are happening in the industry. There's plenty of gray skies out there, but there are a lot of great stories as well. I think the taproom phenomenon is alive and well, and I do sort of wonder how long that can last. How how many times can a person show up to support only one single brand, and stand on a concrete floor and not have a TV, and how long will that last, and have bad acoustics or something in a tiny tap room and be shoulder to shoulder? It's great a few times, but how long does that last? But I do think that there are some really interesting emerging opportunities out there, and one of them being e-commerce. And we're really moving into this age where digital is such an important part of every business now, and engaging consumers in the digital space, and being present and being available there is going to be an increasingly more important part of the beer business, and it's one that the beer business really hasn't tapped into all that well. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on where you guys see e-commerce going for beer, and platforms like Drizzly, the delivery services. Where do you see that evolving, and where do you see it going over the next few years? And I'll start with Dave.
So that's that's another crystal ball answer that I think we'd all again be far more successful than we are if we could see that far. But I think one interesting thing about Drizzly I read very recently, because it is in Boston, and a very significant portion of their sales happens from like 10 p.m. on, and it's about 80% domestic, and it's like 80% 30-pack. At least in the early stages, it's certainly looking to be a commodity delivery system where there's no education, no training. So I think how that hits the craft beer world we'll have a lot of time before we have to worry about that, because I think it's going to be the domestic guys that are playing off of that. What is interesting, though, is there's really an e-commerce thing happening in craft beer now, and it kind of survives in that dark web where people are lining up at those tap rooms, waiting 3 hours. They get their 3-4 packs, and then they immediately go outside, post online, and say, hey, I can trade you these 3-4 packs. They never even consume them themselves because they're waiting for something to come from another state that they can't get. So, I mean, it's really happening, but nobody's making any money off of it, and it's illegal. so how do we start making money off of it, and how do we make it legal? I guess that's really the question, and I don't have an answer for that.
Yeah. John, as you look out, do you see any other big opportunities out there that craft beer should be going after, or craft brewers should be going after?
Out of the Northwest, Amazon's definitely going to be some type of game changer. It's yet to be defined. That's that's where social media, the internet, meets pretty massive commerce. And as that shapes up in the next few years, I think that's one to really, really watch.
Yeah. Brian, how about for you? Biggest opportunity for craft right now?
I think it is the amount of people that still need to be educated or have an opportunity to be educated. I think that they're out there, they're moving in this state, they're moving to other states, and they just need someone to talk to, someone to educate them a little bit more than they've ever been educated before. I mean, I had 3 examples this week. One was at the doctor's office. I'm just talking to the guy taking x-rays for me, and had, where do you work? What do you do? I'm with Great Divide. Oh, what is that? And now all of a sudden, I hope he goes and tells 5 of his friends, and they tell 3 of theirs. And it really, I truly believe that we have an opportunity as a group, as a bunch of people that really, really care about the state of craft and where we want it to go, to continue to educate people in our neighborhoods, on planes, on trains, wherever we are.
So you want your doctor to tell 5 of his friends about Great Divide?
Or more.
We're not based in Utah here, all right? No, this has been really insightful, guys. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your insight. Before we log off here, I will give you guys the opportunity to have sort of one final word on something that you would leave our audience with today, and I'll start with Brian.
I'd say keep doing what you guys are doing. Really, really, really sit back and take a moment sometimes to take a breath, sit back, take it all in, and understand where you want to go. And it's business planning 101, and really got to understand how you want your brewery to shape up in the future and make decisions along the way that will get you there. So,
John?
Yeah, great advice. Look at decisions, how they affect you in 1 year, 5 years, and 10. And where do you want to be in a decade? Because that is your business model and your business plan. And try not, be aware of your surroundings, your competitive environment, but don't get pulled off where you want to go. There's a reason you pick that path. That's the reason why you're probably different.
From my standpoint, I think a lot of people who are in the distribution system already, that's everybody's biggest pain point. It's very frustrating at times. It can be very difficult. One thing I like to always say to our staff and to other brewers who ask, how have we navigated that world is ultimately look at yourself and look at your relationship and answer one question. Who's your biggest customer? Because it's not Costco. It's not, Billy's Sports Pub or Tavern. The guy who's buying your beer or the gal who's buying your beer and writing you checks every single week is your distributor. And we lose sight of the fact that they are truly a customer, although in some ways and forms we're customers of theirs either, so it's not a natural relationship. But we always look inside, and I encourage everybody, when you're frustrated with your distributorship, look at your own flaws and weaknesses and find out where you can honestly look in the mirror and try and find some common ground on those things. And I will leave with one other quick thought, because you touched on it earlier, and it's about our loss of total alcohol as an industry. I tend to be an outlier, guys, with a lot of my opinions. One thing that I always try to hang on to is we need to celebrate all beer, because beer is competing against wine for share of stomach, and beer is competing against spirits. And all beer is hard to brew. All beer has a time and place. And I really hate it when some of us decide to tell somebody that their personal opinions in flavor or styles isn't worth drinking. And I think every time we do that, we denigrate the brand beer. And as brand beer does better and starts taking share of stomach from wine and spirits, craft beer will succeed in that environment as well.
Do you think there's an opportunity there to build greater awareness for quote-unquote brand beer? I mean, is there something more that the industry as a whole could be doing to, elevate beer as a beverage so that consumers are, more informed and more aware that they should be, hypothetically more loyal to beer?
I think the first thing we as an industry should stop doing is embracing phrases like "friends don't let friends drink crap beer," or phrases like fuzzy yellow beer, and some other words that go with that. You don't hear someone who sells tequila, dumping on tequila. You don't see people who sell vodka dumping on vodka. People who sell wine don't dump on wine, and we tend to denigrate our own product when we do that. So I think the first step is to stop denigrating our product, and then the next step would be education. And start embracing beer and what goes into it, because we have a broader flavor profile than any of the spirits out there. They may have sweeter flavors, but we certainly can be far more broad in that spectrum. And when you talk to chefs, what do they want to work with? The chefs want to work with spirits? No. There used to be food and wine pairings, but chefs want to work with beer because they are the guys who ultimately recognize what we bring to the table for variety and flavors, and we should be promoting that.
Well, I think there's, a lot of things that brewers are all trying to do at once, and, maybe that's not at the top of the list of priorities for them, but it certainly is, something that I've heard from a lot of folks, that, they've expressed similar sentiments that beer isn't put forward as, just the beverage and just the category itself in a way that really engages the consumer and makes them excited and, doesn't put them off to the category. And I don't know, I really don't know how much that plays into wine and spirits and what they've been able to accomplish, but it's certainly worth thinking about for sure. Well, we're going to take a short break, let everybody get another beer, and then we'll come back with Chris Kramer from Karl Strauss. So big round of applause for these guys. Thank you.